Hello, group number two. I apologize for not talking to the four of you individually, but I'm going to try to very briefly in 9 to 10 minutes, which is going to be extremely difficult, talk to you about invitational rhetoric, something that we learned in the book. I'm going to briefly cover traditional rhetoric, and then invitational rhetoric, some of the criticisms, and then my overall take. So, if we look at the traditional history of rhetoric, it's been around about 2,500 years. The Greeks have kind of been the ones that came up with it. Uh, and you're familiar with Socrates and Plato. They would get up and they would be rhetors, and rhetor is the word I'm going to use from this point in the presentation. And they would get up and speak. They had these five canons known as invention, arrangement, style, delivery, and memory. And you would get up there, you would give your speech, and you would try to be persuasive. And that's the number one key, is that in traditional rhetoric, the goal is to be persuasive. I have something to tell you. I want it to affect you and to change the environment in some way. Little John and Foss said in our book, the focus of rhetoric has broadened today even more to encompass all the ways humans use symbols to affect those around them and to construct the world in which they live. So it's not just spoken word anymore. It's symbols. It's everything around us that creates communication. And Foss and Griffin, and that would be Sonia K. Foss and Cindy L. Griffin. These are the two that invented invitational rhetoric, said implicit in a conception of rhetoric as persuasion is the assumption that humans are on earth to alter the environment and to influence the social affairs of others. So rhetorical scholars have taken that, given it as a proper and even necessary human function to attempt to change others. And so rhetoric has been around for 2,500 years to change others. The way we try to affect them now has done it. With the invention of technology and living in the technology age that we do, it's not just the spoken word, but all forms of communication are persuasive in some ways. And invitational rhetoric wants to challenge that traditional rhetoric. Now, invitational rhetoric, again, by Foss and Griffin, is not persuasive. And the direct definition from their paper says invitational rhetoric uses the idea of an invitation, both literally and metaphorically, as a conversational mode. When you use an invitation for others to consider your perspective, you invite audience members to see the world as you do and take your perspective seriously. And what that's trying to say is, let me bring my uniqueness. All right? There's no negative feelings. If I'm coming at and trying to persuade you and immediately coming at you and trying to change something about you, there's a lot of humiliation. There's a lot of negativity. It's a patriarchal view, as Foss and Griffin believe. And so you don't feel free to have successful communication, and all communication needs to have some sort of success if anything's going to happen. So the focus is, see the world as you do. I as the rhetor, want you to see my world, but in invitational rhetoric, I want to see your world as well. So, for instance, I'm a French teacher. If you read that from my bio on the first presentation board, you probably already have a thing about me. This is the first time you've seen me. I never posted a picture. So, there was always this belief system. Maybe I'm a male French teacher, and there's not a lot of them. I've been teaching for 17 years. Absolutely love it. We started school this past week. New fresh batch of faces, some older turning faces. Still love the profession. Love what I do. When my time's not teaching, I stay after school and I do speech and debate. It's what I am. It's who I am, and obviously that's what makes rhetoric so important. But the point of bringing this up is this is part of my world. Does that change your thoughts about me? Is what I said before and what I'm going to say after different? It is. And by looking things at my view, you may understand where I'm coming from. And in order to have successful communication, you need to understand where the person's coming from. It's easy to say it. It's not easy to do it. And that's what invitational rhetoric is trying to set up these guidelines on how to do it. They base them on three feminist principles. There's more than three feminist principles, obviously, but there's three they focus on for this theory. One is equality, and that makes both people's message important. In typical traditional rhetoric, think about the Greeks. They would stand up, and everybody else would listen. So what the other person had to say didn't really matter. I was the rhetor. I had a bunch to say. It was important to say, so I said it. In invitational rhetoric, what you have to say matters too. And so we want to bring everything in. Second, that eminent value, not just what you have to say, but everything you have to say is important. Because everyone has a unique perspective. We all come from different backgrounds. We all have different things, and what we have to say is important. And we want that to be displayed in the theory. Second, self-determination. As the rhetor, I can try to persuade, even if I'm trying to do traditional rhetoric. Ultimately, you're going to do what you want to do. I guess if it's successful traditional rhetoric, then I succeeded. But the point is you're going to make your ultimate decision, and so there has to be trust to be that open communication in order to do that. Foss and Griffin say, and I specifically want to talk about the self-determination, this principle involves a trust that others are doing the best they can at the moment, simply need to be unconditionally accepted as the experts of their own lives. I can't be your expert. Everybody has their own special lives, and you are the expert of your own life. And so I have to trust that you're making decisions that are best for you. And then if I understand where you're coming from, maybe I can help you to make that best decision, but ultimately you're going to make it. Something else that comes up important in this is persuasion versus offering. Again, they have three external factors they think are important to have successful communication in invitational rhetoric. The first is safety. In traditional rhetoric, only my opinion would matter as the rhetoric. But in invitational rhetoric, there's a comfort because I know that even though you're the one talking to me and trying to help me, that what I have to say matters. And that's extremely important. Rhetoric contributes to a feeling of safety when it conveys to audience members that the ideas and feelings they share with the rhetoric will be received with respect and care. That I know that when I speak to you, what I say matters, and that's extremely important. Second, that there's value. In traditional rhetoric, I don't care if what you have to say has value or not. It may not. And if it happens to be, congratulations. But my goal is to change you. So I'm trying to get you to think and speak and act like me. So what you have to say doesn't really matter. But in invitational rhetoric, your uniqueness is celebrated because even if we're trying to reach the same goal and we're under the same view or the same worldview, I understand that what you have to say matters. Second, there has to be a freedom, that there's nothing off limits, that I can take whatever you have to say because it's part of you. All right. I have to understand that if you are a person who uses foul language or a person who wants to talk about something that's uncomfortable to talk about, that I'm going to allow you to do that, to be who you are. And I don't have this predetermined set of answers. Think of it this way with freedom. Basically, if you've been in a conversation where instead of listening to what they have to say, you're immediately coming up with your answer, that's more traditional rhetoric. And that happens a lot more than you think. But if you're piggybacking off of what they're saying, there's a better chance that you're going to have successful conversations. Now, some of the criticisms, again, there's a lot of criticisms because this theory came about in 1995. They're trying to come to consensus, and they really haven't successfully done so yet. First of all, isn't all rhetoric persuasive? Is there a way to not be persuasive? Voss and Griffin specifically say change may be the result of invitational rhetoric, but change is not the purpose. But change can happen. They even say when change does occur as a result of undertaking, it's different from the kind of change that typifies the persuasive interactions of traditional rhetoric. So they admit there will be change, and change meant there was persuasion. The fact that it's a catch-22. The fact that I'm offering something to you means I'm trying to persuade you. The fact that they offered this theory, they're hoping that you'll try it. If you try it, they've persuaded you. So all rhetoric is persuasive, and that's the number one problem, I believe, that this theory can't come to a consensus because they can't persuade one another. They want to look at them as opposites, and I'll talk about them in the summation. Second of all, is it possible with different worldviews? If I have a view that's biblical worldview and somebody else has a view based on something entirely different, are we ever going to come together? It's the idea of resourcement. Response by a rhetoric made without the message of the other person considered is what I talked briefly about earlier. Am I listening to what you have to say? I've got these predetermined principles. We have different goals. Are we ever going to get there? Traditional theorists will say, no, there's no way you can have invitational because the only way I'm going to change you is to show you the errors of your ways. Invitational writers will say, no, this is the perfect time to do it because I can understand why you think the way you do, and I can say why we think the way we do, and we can find the common ground. And that's why this theory has led more toward what they call civility now. And should we be more civil to one another? It seems like it would be an obvious yes, but it really isn't. Griffin and Schultz say civility is what we do for the sake of our common journey with others, and out of love and respect for the very idea that there are others. However, Lozano and Reich and Dana Clown, who is a big opponent to this theory, says when theorizing as to how individuals should deal with difficult situations, our authors call for adopting an invitational paradigm grounded in civility is not only anti-ethical to the goals of invitational rhetoric, but also in combating systems of oppression, that we can't do these things. Now, it seems simple. To be civil, you simply open up. Be feel to free what you have to say. Search for a sameness. We talked about in other theories. If we have some sort of similarities, we're going to be okay. Examine the differences, but do it in a calm manner so that we can come to something together and then listen deeply. It's called absolute listening. Don't pre-plan a response. Can we do those things when someone has a differing view than us? And they really can't decide. Some say it needs to be traditional rhetoric, some says it needs to be invitational rhetoric. And I think that's why this theory hasn't been as successful as it can be, because the principles are right, the approach is wrong. And I would say, and you notice in one of my earlier slides it says traditional versus in big letters, invitational rhetoric. I don't think it's versus. I think traditional and invitational rhetoric go together. Why can't we be open regardless? It's easy to say. If I was trying to have a conversation with Adolf Hitler back in the day, knowing his views, could I truly have an invitational rhetoric and understand where Adolf was coming from? I don't know. And that's what makes this difficult. They even say that the problem that they said in their essay is that this isn't to be used all the time, and so that's what's opened it up. I think invitational rhetoric can be used all the time. Open up to hear what the person has to say. Why can't we have a freedom to express what we have to say? We can't tackle the big issues nowadays because we simply are afraid to talk about them because we're afraid of how we're going to be judged, humiliation, etc. Traditional rhetoric is what has the humiliation and the patriarchy. We can be redders. We can be someone who invites people in the world. See where I'm coming from. Let me see where you're coming from. And find our sameness. Eliminate the differences. Where are we different? There's some ways we're always going to be different, but that doesn't mean we're not reaching the same goal. We all here have a biblical worldview, but we're all reaching it in a different way, and we're all approaching it in a different way. So we can use them in all situations. We just have to be able to think about it. And so, again, it's very, very brief because our presentation is short and I'm already over time. But invitational rhetoric does have a place in our society, but not until we know how to use it practically. That's my thought process. I want to thank you all. I look forward to your responses. I hope you enjoy my responses next week. And I will enjoy this last week of class with you guys. Thank you.